This is an analysis from Alpha Business Media. Today, we're digging into a paradox right at the heart of Nepal's economy. Here's the question. Why is a nation of farmers struggling to feed itself? Let's get into it.
So the whole problem really starts with this major disconnect. You've got a sector that employs most of the population but somehow contributes a surprisingly small amount to the national wealth. The numbers really tell the story here.
Just think about the scale for a second. Agriculture is literally the backbone of Nepal's workforce. We're talking just over half the entire population. That's millions of people whose livelihood depends on it.
And yet, even with more than half the country working in it, the entire agricultural sector adds up to less than a quarter of the nation's GDP. And, what's more, that number is actually going down. That right there tells you something's deeply inefficient.
So what's really driving this huge gap? Well, it's a classic sign of an underproductive sector, one bogged down by old methods, tiny farms, and not enough investment. So what did the government try to do about it?
Well, to try and fix this productivity problem, the government rolled out a pretty ambitious modernization plan. It was a two-pronged strategy, really designed to shake things up and transform the whole sector.
The strategy really focused on two main pillars. First, get modern technology out there. We're talking machines, better seeds, things like that, to make farming more efficient. And second, pump in some serious government subsidies to lower costs for farmers and get them to invest. On paper, it sounds pretty logical, right?
But the real question is, how did this plan actually work out in the real world? Let's take a look at the gap between what was promised and what was actually delivered.
The promise of technology was obvious. More crops, more income, a system that's more sustainable. But that's where the promise just hit a brick wall. In reality, getting farmers to actually adopt this tech on a wide scale has completely stalled out.
You see, adoption is still incredibly low because new tools on their own just can't fix these deeper systemic problems. We're talking about the high cost of buying equipment, land that's so chopped up it makes big machinery impractical, really poor rural infrastructure, and, frankly, a huge lack of technical know-how.
And it's a similar story with the government subsidy program. Even though they threw billions at it, a staggering 81% of all the subsidies over a 5-year period went to just one thing: chemical fertilizers. This just created this massive dependency and pretty much ignored other critical needs like infrastructure or insurance.
And it gets worse. The system is just riddled with inefficiency and, let's be honest, corruption. This quote from international research suggests that a huge chunk of this money, maybe as much as 35%, never even made it to the farmers. Instead, it was lost to so-called commissions, keeping that critical aid from the people who need it most.
Okay, so with these huge failures in implementation, you have to ask, did the plan actually meet any of its main goals? Let's check the report card.
So, goal number 1 was food security. But here's the kicker. Nepal's dependence on foreign food is actually growing. By 2022, food imports made up almost 18% of the country's total imports. That's a really alarming number for a nation of farmers.
And you can see this failure clear as day when you look at the food trade deficit. That's the gap between what they import and what they export. It just exploded. It went from 11 billion Nepalese rupees to 173 billion in just over a decade. Nepal is going in the wrong direction, moving further away from feeding itself, not closer.
Okay, what about the second big goal, boosting agricultural exports? Well, when you actually dig into the data, you find that a lot of the so-called export value isn't coming from Nepali farms at all. It's coming from importing raw materials like soybean and palm oil, processing them, and then just re-exporting them.
So, what does all of this tell us? It tells us the problem isn't a lack of spending or even a lack of ambition. It's something much, much deeper. These failures all point to huge, systemic problems within the country's institutions.
And these are the core barriers we're talking about. Things like fragmented land, no access to loans, the growing threat of climate change, and weak governance. They're all connected. And together, they create this trap that just prevents any real progress.
At the end of the day, just throwing money at subsidies or trying to introduce a few new machines is bound to fail when the whole system underneath is broken. What's needed is a complete structural overhaul. And this leaves us with the billion-dollar question, doesn't it? Can Nepal actually reform its entire system to finally unlock its massive agricultural potential? The answer to that question is going to decide the future of its economy and, more importantly, the livelihoods of millions of its people.